The twin suns of Zarona blazed like angry eyes in the purple sky, their burning light cutting through the golden amber windows of Baron Keenal's palace. Inside the massive building, the air felt cold and clean, but heavy with the weight of power and fear. The palace rose from the shifting desert sands like a giant beast made of black stone and sharp edges, its walls gleaming like dark mirrors under the alien light. Baron Keenal stood tall in the great hall, his body like a statue carved from silver, metal. Strange symbols covered his skin, marking him as one of the highest rulers of Zarona. These marks glowed softly under the floating lights that danced above his head like captured stars. Around him, the court gathered in silence. Dozens of wealthy nobles dressed in shining robes, each decorated with the symbols of their powerful families. These were the chosen few who helped rule Zarona's harsh lands, yet none of them dared to look directly at Baron Keenal for too long. His reputation for cruelty had been earned through countless acts of violence and cold decisions. Fear hung in the air like a thick fog, making everyone speak in whispers and move with careful steps. Hidden in the shadows at the edge of the grand chamber, Chiari watched everything unfold. Her presence here was an act of rebellion. Her father had strictly forbidden her from entering the court unless he called for her. But curiosity burned in her heart like a fire, stronger than her fear of punishment. Her mixed heritage showed clearly in her face, softer features than the sharp angles of pure Zaronians, and deep violet eyes that seemed to hold secrets from another world. In Zarona's strict society, she was an outsider, marked as different from birth. But what made her father see her as even more of a disgrace were her lifeless legs, which had never worked properly. In his eyes, she was a stain on his perfect reputation, a weakness he couldn't hide or fix. Chiari's fingers gripped the wheels of her chair until her knuckles turned white. Her skin was a soft green color, like emeralds dulled by time. Nothing like her father's polished silver. This green came from her mother, a human woman named Lyra, who had been both brilliant and kind. Lyra had traveled to Zarona as part of a team of scientists studying other worlds. The love story between Chiari's parents had been forbidden from the start, a passionate romance that burned bright, but ended in heartbreak when Lyra died from a strange alien sickness years ago. From that forbidden union, Chiari was born, but her father had never fully accepted her existence. Where Lyra had seen endless possibilities in their daughter, Keenal saw only flaws and disappointment. The difference in their views had created a gulf between father and daughter that seemed impossible to cross. Zarona thrives on strength. Baron Keenal's voice cut through the room like a sword blade, sharp and commanding. And strength demands sacrifices. The nobles murmured their agreement, though several shifted uncomfortably in their places. Some seemed nervous, others calculating, but all were careful to show the proper respect. Above the center of the room, a holographic map appeared, floating like a ghost made of light. It showed the vast desert that surrounded them, and the nomadic tribes that wandered across its endless expanse. Red lines marked expanding borders, creeping steadily into the territories where the nomads had lived for generations. "They resist us," Keenal continued, his tone empty of any emotion, as cold as winter wind. "They cling to their primitive ways, wasting resources that should fuel our rise to greatness. This cannot continue." Chiari's jaw tightened as she listened. She had heard these arguments many times before. Always the same justifications for conquest and control. The nomads were free-spirited, resourceful clans who had survived the harsh desert for countless generations. They had become convenient scapegoats in her father's endless quest for more power and territory. He painted them as dangerous enemies, but Chiari suspected his true motives lay in something else entirely. The rare crystals buried deep beneath their sacred lands. These crystals were worth more than gold, and her father's greed for them seemed to grow stronger each day. One courtier, a nervous-looking Zaronian with pale lavender skin and wide, anxious eyes, dared to step forward from the crowd. His voice shook as he spoke, betraying his fear even as he tried to offer a different perspective. "Baron Keenel," he began, his words trembling like leaves in a storm. Perhaps a more measured approach could yield better results. The nomads have never truly threatened our core territories. Keenel silenced him with a single, withering glance. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as his cold eyes fixed on the brave courtier. "Measured approaches," he said slowly, each word dripping with contempt, "are for those too weak to act decisively. They are for cowards who lack the stomach for true leadership." The lavender-skinned man faltered immediately, his courage crumbling under the weight of his baron's disapproval. He retreated quickly into the safety of the crowd, his head bowed in shame and fear. Chiari's stomach churned as she watched the scene unfold. Her father's hatred for compromise extended to every aspect of his rule, like a poison that infected everything he touched. She had seen it countless times in his policies, in the way he dismissed anyone who failed to meet his impossible standards, and especially in the way he looked at her. The court session continued for what felt like hours, with various nobles presenting reports and seeking approval for their own smaller acts of cruelty and control. Each speaker seemed to try to outdo the others in their displays of loyalty and ruthlessness, as if competing for their baron's favor. Finally, as the twin suns began to sink lower in the sky, the court began to disperse. The nobles filed out in small groups, their voices returning to normal volumes only when they were well away from their leader's presence. It was then that Keenel turned his attention to her. The sudden weight of his gaze made Chiari's heart pound like a drum in her chest, but she refused to look away or show weakness. She had learned long ago that showing fear to her father only made things worse. He strode toward her with measured steps, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor like the countdown to an execution. When he stopped before her chair, his expression was unreadable, but his words carried the weight of a death sentence. "Come to my chambers," he said simply, his voice devoid of any warmth or affection. "We must speak." Chiari followed, pushed silently by one of the palace guards whose face showed no emotion. The journey through the winding halls felt like a march toward her own doom. Every step brought her closer to whatever punishment her father had devised for her unauthorized presence in the court. Her father's private chamber was as stark and imposing as the man himself, a reflection of his cold personality. The walls were crafted from raw metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an atmosphere of oppression and gloom. A single table stood at the center of the room, surrounded by nothing else. No chairs, no decorations, no signs of comfort or humanity. When they were alone, with only the guard remaining by the door, Keenel didn't waste time on pleasantries or explanations. His next words hit her like a physical blow. "You no longer belong here." Chiari's breath caught in her throat. She stared at him, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. Surely she had misunderstood. Surely her own father WOULDN single quotes T. quotes. She whispered, her voice barely audible. "You are a burden," he said coldly, each word chosen carefully to inflict maximum pain. "A flaw in an otherwise perfect design. You have no place in Zarona's future." Her voice, when it finally came, was raw with emotion and disbelief. "I am your daughter." "You are my mistake," he replied without hesitation, each word cutting like broken glass. "Born of weakness and poor judgment. Your mother was a distraction, a brilliant mind wasted on sentimentality and foolish emotions. And you inherited her frailty without gaining her brilliance. Chiari's hands trembled with a mixture of fury and despair. Years of suppressed anger began to boil over, giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. "You're wrong," she sighed, her voice growing stronger. "You're wrong about her, and you're wrong about me." Keenal's expression didn't change. He might as well have been carved from stone for all the emotion he showed. He gestured to the guards who had remained at the door, waiting for his command. "Take her to the desert," he ordered, as casually as if he were discussing the weather. "Let it decide her fate." The world tilted as her chair was grabbed and tilted backward. The guards began to move her toward the door, but she struggled against them, her green fingers clawing at the edges of her chair. "You can't do this," she shouted, her voice echoing off the metal walls. "Father, you can't do this." Keenal turned his back to her, his voice remaining devoid of emotion even as he condemned his own daughter to almost certain death. "The desert will decide what you are worth," he said. "If you are truly as strong as you claim, you will survive. If not," he shrugged, the gesture more chilling than any threat. The twin suns beat down mercilessly as the transport ship hovered over the shifting sands like a metal vulture. The guard set her down without ceremony, her wheelchair sinking slightly into the soft dunes. The sand was already hot enough to burn, and the day was only beginning. She looked up at the guards, her chest heaving with rage and terror. These were men she had known her entire life, guards who had protected her as a child. Yet now they showed no emotion as they prepared to leave her to die. "You're cowards, all of you," she spat, her voice carrying across the empty desert. "Cowards who follow orders without thinking, without feeling." They didn't reply. Perhaps they couldn't meet her eyes, or perhaps they simply didn't care. The transport began to ascend, its engines kicking up clouds of sand that stung her eyes and filled her mouth with grit. Within moments, she was alone in the vast expanse. The silence was deafening after the constant noise of the palace. Here, there was only the whisper of wind across sand and the distant cry of some desert creature she couldn't identify. The heat pressed down on her like a physical weight, already beginning to sap her strength. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, its surface shimmering with deceptive mirages that promised water where none existed. Chiari stared at the horizon, her vision blurred by unshed tears she refused to let fall. She clenched her fists, feeling the coarse grit of sand beneath her palms. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, but she forced herself to push it away. She wouldn't let his cruelty define her future. "I'll survive," she whispered, her voice cracking but resolute. "And one day you'll regret this decision." The desert answered with silence, but in her heart, a tiny ember of defiance began to burn. It would grow, she promised herself. It would have to. The desert stretched in all directions like a golden ocean frozen in time, an unbroken expanse of towering dunes and cracked earth that seemed to go on forever. The twin suns loomed above like the eyes of angry gods, relentless and oppressive, baking the air until it shimmered like liquid fire. The heat wrapped around Chiari like chains made of iron, suffocating and inescapable. Each breath burned her lungs as she struggled to push her wheelchair forward through the sand. The wheels, designed for smooth palace floors, sank deep into the soft dunes with every movement, making progress painfully slow. Her arms, already weak from years of limited use, trembled under the strain. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, but she clenched her jaw and forced herself onward. Every inch gained felt like a triumph against the mocking vastness that surrounded her. The desert was alive with subtle sounds that most people would never notice. There was the constant hiss of shifting sand, like whispers from invisible spirits. the distant screech of a bird of prey circling high above, waiting for her to become its next meal. And always, the ominous whisper of wind carrying grains of sand that stung her exposed skin like thousands of tiny needles. Chiari paused, wiping sweat from her brow with a trembling hand. Her green skin, once a soft emerald hue that reminded her of her mother's favorite plants, now gleamed slick with sweat and dust. She looked up at the twin suns, their blinding light stabbing into her eyes like daggers. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, cold and unyielding. "The desert will decide what you are worth." She spat into the sand, the moisture disappearing instantly into the thirsty earth. "You think I'll die out here, father?" she said aloud, her voice carrying across the empty landscape. "You'll see how wrong you are. You'll see." But her defiance rang hollow against the vast emptiness. She knew the truth that her pride tried to hide. She had no food, no water, and no shelter. Every passing minute drained more of her strength, and the day was still young. Her wheelchair, though built with the finest technology the palace could provide, was completely ill-suited for this unpredictable terrain. The wheels constantly snagged on buried stones and sank into patches of loose sand, forcing her to stop every few feet to heave it free. Each time she stopped, the heat seemed to press down harder, as if the desert itself was trying to crush her. Sweat poured down her face, mixing with dust to create muddy streaks on her green skin. Her thoughts drifted to her mother, Lyra, a woman who had always spoken of resilience and hope even in the darkest times. "Even the smallest seed can bloom in the harshest soil," Lyra had said once, tucking Chiari into bed as a child. "You only have to believe it can. You only have to keep trying, no matter how impossible it seems." Chiari gritted her teeth, gripping the memory like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. "I'm the seed," she muttered under her breath, her voice barely audible over the whisper of wind. "And this is my soil. I'll show them all." She pushed on, her muscles screaming in protest with every movement. The hours blurred together as the suns climbed higher in the sky, their heat turning the sand into a searing trap that burned through the fabric of her clothes. Her green skin began to blister under the twin assault of heat and light. The exposed parts of her body became raw and aching, but she refused to stop. Stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant her father would win. By mid-afternoon, when the suns reached their highest point and the heat became almost unbearable, she finally collapsed under the sparse shade of a jagged rock outcropping. Her chest heaved with shallow breaths as she tried to cool her burning lungs. Her mind wavered between clarity and delirium. Images danced in her vision like ghosts. Her mother's kind face smiling down at her, her father's cold sneer of disapproval, the silent judgment of the court nobles who had never seen her as anything more than an embarrassment. She blinked hard, trying to banish the phantoms that threatened to overwhelm her rational mind. The heat was getting to her, making her see things that weren't there. The sands whispered in her ears, a sound both soothing and maddening. It was almost like voices, speaking in a language she couldn't understand but somehow felt in her bones. "Is this how it ends?" she rasped, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Is this really how my story finishes?" She closed her eyes, her energy nearly spent. The heat pressed down on her like a physical weight, and her body began to surrender to exhaustion. Perhaps her father had been right. Perhaps she was too weak to survive in this harsh world. Then she heard it, a low rumble, almost imperceptible against the desert's constant ambient hum. Her eyes snapped open, and she strained to listen with every fiber of her being. The sound grew louder, becoming a mechanical whine mixed with the grinding of metal against metal. It was unlike anything she had ever heard in the sterile halls of the palace. Rough, practical, and somehow alive. Chiari pulled herself upright, ignoring the sharp protest from her aching muscles. She squinted at the horizon, her vision blurring from heat waves and fatigue. For a moment she thought it might be another mirage, another cruel trick of the desert. But then a dark shape emerged from the shimmering air, moving steadily toward her across the sand. Her heart leaped in her chest, though she couldn't decide if what she felt was hope or fear. The figure came into focus slowly, like a photograph developing. It was a vehicle, but unlike any she had seen before, cobbled together from mismatched parts, its wheels reinforced with thick treads designed specifically for desert travel. The contraption sputtered and roared, spitting sand in its wake, but it moved with purpose and confidence. At its helm sat a lone figure, wrapped in tattered cloth that fluttered in the wind. Goggles obscured their face, but they steered the vehicle with practiced ease, their posture relaxed despite the harsh environment. Chiari's instincts screamed at her to hide, to find some way to conceal herself, but she had nowhere to go. The rock outcropping provided shade, but no real cover, and her wheelchair would be visible from miles away. The figure slowed as they approached, the vehicle's engine cutting off with a sputtering hiss. An eerie silence fell over the desert, broken only by the faint whistling of wind across sand. The driver climbed down from their vehicle, their movements fluid but cautious. They pulled off their goggles, revealing the face of a human man with deeply sunburned skin and dark, piercing eyes. His face was weathered, etched with lines of both age and experience, but his expression was not unkind. "Well," he said, his voice gravelly but curious, "what do we have here?" His gaze swept over Chiari, taking in her wheelchair, her blistered skin, and the defiant tilt of her chin. There was no judgment in his eyes, only interest and perhaps a touch of admiration. "You're not from around here," he observed, settling into a crouch a few feet away. He rested his arms on his knees, making himself less threatening. Chiari struggled to sit straighter, trying to maintain some dignity despite her desperate situation. "And you are?" The man's weathered face creased into what might have been a smile. "Name's Jareth. You look like you've had a rough day." Chiari's laugh came out as a harsh cough, her throat too dry for proper sound. Understatement of the century. Jareth tilted his head, studying her with those dark eyes. There was something in his gaze that reminded her of her mother, a kind of intelligence mixed with compassion that she had rarely seen in the palace. "You're lucky I found you," he said simply. "Most people don't last long out here, especially when they're unprepared." Her jaw tightened offensively. "I don't need your pity." "Didn't say you did," he replied easily, standing and brushing sand from his worn gloves. "But you do need water, and I happen to have some." He reached into a pack strapped to his vehicle, pulling out a dented metal canteen. The sound of liquid sloshing inside was the most beautiful thing Chiari had ever heard. He held it out to her, but she hesitated. Her pride warred with her desperation, each fighting for control of her actions. The sight of the water, clear and glistening in the harsh sunlight, finally tipped the scales. She snatched the canteen from his hand and drank greedily, the cool liquid burning as it slid down her parched throat. It tasted better than the finest wine served in her father's palace. Jareth watched her with a mixture of amusement and concern, his expression thoughtful. "You've got fire, I'll give you that," he said once she had finished drinking. "But fire alone only gets you so far out here. The desert doesn't care about your spirit if you don't have the knowledge to back it up." Chiari looked up at him, water dripping from her chin. For the first time in hours, she felt something other than despair. This stranger, this desert wanderer, had shown her more kindness in 5 minutes than her father had in years. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words almost lost in the wind. Jareth nodded, taking back the canteen. The question now is, what do we do with you? Kyla wiped her mouth, her eyes narrowing. What's that supposed to mean? It means you've got a choice, he gestured to his fickle. You can come with me, or you can stay out here and prove your fire to the desert, up to you. Aker's mind raced shedent. Trusting strangers in Zirconia was a fool's gamble, but she didn't have many options. The thought of being alone, defeated by the sands, churned her stomach fine. She said finally, but if you try anything you'll regret it. Jarth grinned, the expression sting his rugged features. I like you already, come on. He lifted her into the vehicle with surprising gentleness, securing her wheelchair in the back as they sped across the dunes. Chiari couldn't help but glance at him, her curiosity outweighing her suspicion. Who was this man? And why had he saved her? The desert blurred past him, its endless expanse suddenly filled with new possibilities. For the first time since her exile, Chiari felt something stir within her. Hope. It was fragile like a newly sprouted seed, but it was there, and she would fight to keep it alive. Caller's first impression of Jarrett's so-called home was underwhelming, hidden behind a craggy outcropping of stone. The metallic entrance looked more like a hastily constructed hatch than the gateway Tony Iving remarkable. The vehicle skidded to a halt, sending up a plume of sand. Jarth climbed out with practiced ease, boots crunching on the desert floor. This is it, he said, his voice tinged with pride. Welcome to my slice of... Zarkan. Chiari frowned, her eyes narrow-winged at the unassuming door embedded into the cliff's side that looks like it's one strong wind away from collapsing. Jarth chuckled, undeterred by her skepticism. Appearances can be deceiving. Come on, you'll see. He rounded to the back of the vehicle, retrieving her wheelchair and setting it down with surprising care. The ease with which he handled her, neither patronizing nor dismissive, felt disarmingly normal. Chiari wasn't used to being treated like anything other than a burden or a mistake. She studied him wearily as he helped her into the chair. Jarth proceeded. Hidden panel on the rock face, and the door slid open with a low hiss, revealing a narrow corridor that extended into darkness. Warm air tinged with the smell of oil and machinery wafted out to meet them. After you, he said, gesturing with a mock flourish. Carrie rolled her eyes but wheeled herself forward, her hands gripping the rims of her chair tightly. The corridor's walls, made of reinforced metal patched with scavenged panels, gleamed under flickering yellow lights. It felt more like a burrow than a home. But the air was cooler, and for the first time since her exile, she wasn't baking under the suns. The corridor widened into a massive cavern, and Carrie stopped short. Jared's slice of zirconia turned out to be a sprawling workshop, carved into the heart of the rock. Tables cluttered with tools, scrap metal, and half-finished devices sprawled across the space. Pipes and cables snaked across the ceiling, humming faintly, with power crates stacked haphazardly against walls overflowed with crystalline components, alien alloys, and salvaged electronics. What is this place? Kurt asked, her voice tinged with awe. My workshop, Jareth replied, his grin widening. Every piece of text you see, I've either built, repaired, or salvaged. Took years, but it's home. Kaya rolled further in her gaze, sweeping over the controlled chaos. Despite the mess, there was an odd sense of order, as though everything had a purpose. Only Jareth understood. She paused at a table where a small drone hovered unsteadily above its surface, its mismatched wings flapping in uneven bursts. What's this supposed to be? She asked, poking at the drone. It wobbled, emitting a distressed when an experiment, Jarth said, plucking the drone from fear and flipping a switch to silence. It's still working out, the kinks. Kyrie smirked. Doesn't look like it's going towing any battles. Not yet, Jarth admitted, setting it down. But give it time. He moved deeper into the workshop, motioning for her to follow. She wheeled after him, navigating around piles of scrap and towering shelves that seemed ready to topple at any moment. They reached the central table where a series of glowing crystals pulsed, faintly casting an ethereal light. Karai leaned closer, captivated by the soft hum. They emitted what are this as zirconia and power core. As Jareth explained, crystals like bees are what keep this place running. Found them in annulled wreck years ago. Still don't fully understand how they work, but they're powerful and volatile. Kyla glanced at him volatile. How one wrong move and you're looking at an explosion big enough to level half this. Cliff, he said casually. She leaned back immediately and Jarth laughed. Relax, I haven't blown myself up yet. Yet she muttered her skepticism. Returning, Jarth opened the storage locker and pulled out a packet of dried rations and a canteen of water. He placed them on the table in front of her. Here. You must be starving. Chiari hesitated, eyeing the food. Was starving, but accepting help felt like admitting weakness. After a moment, hunger won out. She tore open the packet and began eating, the bland taste barely registering as she devoured the contents. Jarth leaned against the table watching her, with a mix of curiosity and something softer concern. Maybe. So what's your story then? You're not exactly dressed for desert. Survival. Chiari paused, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. My story doesn't concern you. Maybe not, he said, shrugging, but we've got time, and I like a good story. She sighed, the weight of everything she had endured pressing down on her. My father is. Baron Kenfield. Jareth's eyebrows were shot up. The Baron Senil. Well, that explains the attitude. Chiari scowled. He left me to die in the desert, said I was a flaw, useless. Jareth's expression darkened. Sounds like a real charmer. Hune's powerful, she said, her voice laced with bitterness. People fear him. Power and fear aren't the same thing, Jareth, said one. Fades faster than you think. Chiari stared at him, surprised would be the edge in his tone. You sound like you know something about that, maybe. I do, he replied, his voice softer. No. Look, whatever he said about you, Hune's wrong. You're alive, aren't you? That's proof enough. Your noticeless. Key's jaw tightened. She wanted to believe him, but the scars her father's words had left ran deep. Jared straightened, his grin returning. Speaking of proof, I think I might be able to help with that. Chiari frowned. Help with? Wade gestured toward her wheelchair. Getting you out of that chair. Her heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? I've been working on something, he said, walking over to a covered table. He pulled back the tarp to reveal a sleek exoskelett frame. It's not finished, but if it works you'll be walking in more. Chiari stared at the frame, her breath catching. The idea seemed too good to be true. Why would you do this for me? Jarth met her gaze, his expression serious. Because I've been where you are feeling like everything's been taken from you, but you don't have to stay there. You've got more potential than you realize. Kara swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over her. She didn't fully trust them yet, but for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. Heal, right? Shazade, her voice steady. Let's see what you've got. Yeri's grin widened. That's their spirit. The two of them turned their attention to the exoskeleton, the quiet hum of the workshop filling the culling air as the seeds of something new began to take root. Kari didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time she was ready to fight for it. The first trial with the exoskeleton was a disaster. Chiari gritted her teeth, her fingers curling tightly around the armrests of her wheelchair as Jareth adjusted the straps of the skeletal frame wrapped around her legs. The contraption, a delicate balance of zircony and crystal energy and salvaged alloys, was sleek and alien in design. It hummed faintly, the crystals embedded in its joints, pulsing in rhythm with an internal power source. This might feel strange first, Jareth said, his voice unusually hesitant. Don't fight it. The system needs to learn your movements. I don't have movements. Cureship back, her tone sharp. In case you've forgotten, my legs are useless. Jarth looked up, meeting her eyes with a calm intensity. There. Not useless, they just need the right tools. His confidence irritated. Her shouldn't trust optimism. It felt like a cheap substitute for reality. Still, she forced herself to nod. What choice did she have? If this were worked, she wouldn't need to rely on anyone. Not Jarth, not her father, not anyone. Jarth stepped back, tapping a control panel on his wrist. The exoskeleton shuddered to life, its crystalline nodes glowing brighter. Chiari felt a sudden jolt in her legs, a sensation so foreign it made her gasp. Good, Jarth said, his voice steady. That's the neural interface assessing with your system. Try to move. Chiari focus ending the mental command to her legs, a command that had gone ignored for years at first. Nothing happened then. Slow-lithe exoskeleton responded the mechanical joints word, lifting her left leg a fraction off the ground. Her heart raced its working, she whispered, all breaking through her skepticism. The exoskeleton took another step, but the motion was clumsy and uneven. Her balance faltered, and she pitched forward. Jarth caught her before she hit the ground. Easy, he said, steadying her. You're not going to master this in 5 minutes. Chiari pushed him away, frustration bubbling to the surface. I didn't need your help, you don't have to. Do this alone, Jareth replied, his tone calm but firm. Pride won't keep you bright. Chiari glared at him, but said nothing. He was right. And she hated that he was right. Reluctantly she let him guide her back into her wheelchair. The failure stung, but it didn't extinguish the flicker of hope. If the exoskeleton could move even a little, it could be refined for the next few days. They worked adroitly. Chiari pushed herself to the brink of exhaustion, refusing to let setbacks deter her each time. She fell, got back up, the ache in her arms and legs, a reminder of her determination. Jarth, to his credit, remained patient, waking the exoskeleton design after every session. What's wrong with this thing? Carrie growled after her fourth Falinay. Single session, it's too slow. It's not the machine, Jarth said, adjusting a crystalline note on the frame. It's your mind. You've spent years thinking you're powerless. That's not something you can learn overnight. Chiari scowled. I don't need a lecture. You need to stop fighting it, Jarth said, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. The exoskeleton isn't just a tool, it's an extension of you. The more you treat it like a crutch, the harder this will be. Larry opened her mouth to retort, but stopped. His words struck a nerve. She hated how much sense he made. With a begrudging nod, she signaled for him to reset the system. This time she approached the exoskeleton with a different mindset, focusing not on her frustration but on the possibility of success. The change was immediate. The exoskeleton moved more fluidly, responding to her mental commands with greater precision. By the end of the session, she was taking tentative steps without Jarrett's help. Her muscles burned and her lungs felt ready to collapse, but she didn't care. For the first time in her life, she was standing on her own. As her proficiency with the exoskeleton grew, so did her understanding of the workshop's many wonders. Jarth began teaching her the basics of engineering, showing her how to repair simple machines and program basic commands into the workshop's automated systems. You've got a knack for this, Jareth said one evening as Chiari assembled a small drone from scrap parts. Better than I did when I started. Sia shrugged, hiding pride that threatened to surface. It's just logic. Machines are easier to deal with than people. Jarth chuckled. You're not wrong there. Their conversations grew more frequent, and Carrie found herself learning more about Jaz's past. He had been an engineer on Earth, a world she had only heard about in passing. His ship had crashed during a routine salvage mission, stranding him on Zarona with little more than his tools and his wits. Why didn't you try to leave? Carrie asked one evening. As they worked side by side, Jarth paused, his hand stilling over a circuit board. Because there wasn't an anything to go back to. The weight in his voice silenced her. She didn't press further, sensing that the wounds behind his words were still raw. One night, as Kari practiced walking under the dim light of the workshop, something next happened. She felt a strange pulse emanating from the exoskeleton crystals, a vibration that resonated her body. It wasn't just a sensation, it was a connection, a feeling as though the crystals were alive. She said, her voice steady but urgent. Something's happening. He looked up from his work, his brow furrowed. What do you mean the crystals? Chiari said, flexing her fingers as the vibration intensified. I can feel them. Jarth approached, his gaze sharp. That shouldn't be possible. The crystals are just energy conduits. Chiari shook her head. It's not just energy, it's something more. As she spoke, the crystals on the exoskeleton glowed brighter, casting another worldly light across the workshop. The machinery around them hummed in response as Thorf crystals were reaching out to everything in the room. Jareth stared, his expression shifting from confusion to I've never seen them react like this. Chiari met his gaze, a new determination hounding her features. Maybe it's not the exoskeleton that's adapting to me. Maybe I'm adapting to it. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. For years, she had believed her body was Burkina shell incapable of anything meaningful, but now standing tall in the glowing exoskeleton, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: power. And for the first time, she dared to imagine what she could do with it. The morning air carried the distinct sharpness of impending confrontation. Though the desert was a realm of silence, Carrie could feel the tension crackling like a storm waiting to erupt. The twin suns had just begun their ascent, bathing the sands in soft molten gold. From her perch on a rocky outcrop near Jarrett's workshop, she watched the nomad riders assemble. Belothere Sander runners' vehicles, cobbled together from decades of scavenging, sat idle, their engines purring softly. The riders stood in small groups, speaking in low tones, sharpening blades, or loading weapons. Chiari adjusted the fit of her exoskeleton, the now familiar hum of the crystals embedded in its joints vibrating gently against her skin. Thefrom no longer felt foreign. It had become an extension of her body, responding to her every thought and movement with seamless precision. Yet she couldn't shake the unease creeping up her spine. This is no simple rage, she muttered, her voice low but firm. Jarth, standing beside her, glanced down at the scene. It's not supposed to be, he said. The Baron's forces won't ignore us after this. Chiari shot him a sideways glance at that supposed to be comforting. He smirked. It's reality. Comfort doesn't win battles below. The nomad leader barked orders to his riders. His imposing figure cut a striking silhouette against the endless dunes. The scars crisscrossing his blue skin seemed to catch the light, each one a testament to battles fought and survived. His voice carried easily over the gathering authority, measured, commanding respect despite their uneasy alliance. Chiari couldn't deny the magnetism in his presence. She stepped down from the outcrop, her exoskeleton joints warring softly as she landed with precision. The nomads turned to watch her approach, their expressions a mixture of weariness and curiosity. Though she had spent weeks among them, they still viewed her as an outsider, a half-blood noble who had no place in their fight. Tane crossed his arms as she approached. You're late, he said, his tone neutral but sharp. Chiari met his gaze unflinching. I'm here, iron eye. His lips curled into the faintest smile, more acknowledgement than warmth. You've proven you can fight. Let's see if you can lead. She didn't rise to the bait, instead turning her attention to the gathered riders. Their faces were a mosaic of determination, fear, and skepticism. She could feel their doubt heavy as the desert heat. Her father's name still carried weight, and many of them saw her as a shadow of the man who had torn their lives apart. We're neither to survive, she began, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Survival is what the Baron has forced on Yuskrathing by watching your people die while you scavenge for scraps. He doesn't fear you because he thinks you're broken, Tode. We show him that's not true. The merced eyes fixed on her, some with cautious hope, others with the quiet steel of those who had lost too much to fear anything anymore. This isn't just a raid, she continued. We hit the convoy hard. We take their supplies, their weapons, and their arrogance. We send a message that we're not just survivors, we're a force. Tane watched her in silence, his expression unreadable when she finished. He nodded once, a gesture of reluctant approval. The convoy appeared on the horizon at mid-morning, its line of armored transports kicking up clouds of dust as they cut through the desert. The nomads lay in white, hidden behind the dunes, their Sander runners positioned strategically to encircle the target. Chiari crouched beside Jarth, her exoskeleton glowing faintly as it absorbed the ambient heat. She adjusted the settings on her gauntlet, essing its targeting system with the makeshift rifle strap to her back. They're using escort drones, JTH said, peering through a pair of binoculars. Old models, but still dangerous if we're not careful. Chiari nodded. Disable their communications first. If they can't call for reinforcements, we stand a chance. Tane's voice crackled over the comms. Ready, Chiari responded, her tone steady. On your signal. Tane raised his arm, a silent command to his riders. The sand runners roared to life, their engines erupting in a cacophony that shattered the desert stillness. The con guards scrambled, their rifles firing wildly as the nomads descended upon them like Azenstorm Chiari, moved with precision, her exoskeleton propelling her forward in long, fluid strides. The rifle on her back hummed as she fired bursts of energy targeting. The convoy's drones, one by one, fell, their circuits sparking. As they crashed into the sand, a transport door burst open ahead and a squad of soldiers emerged, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. Carrie didn't hesitate. She leaped onto the side of the transport, her exoskeleton enhanced strength, allowing her to tear the door from its hinges. The soldiers raised their weapons, but she was faster. Her gauntlet emitted a pulse of energy, sending them sprawling clear. She called over the cums, Tane. Sander Runner screeched to Ahil beside her, and he leapt onto the transport with practiced ease. Nice work, he said, tossing her a crate of supplice. We're not done yet. The battle raged on the desert. A whirlwind of sound and motion. Siri lost herself in the fight, her movements instinctive, her mind focused for the first time. She felt the full potential of the exoskeleton, not just as a tool, but as an extension of herself. She was faster, stronger, more precise than she had ever imagined possible. By the time the last soldier fell, the convoy was in ruins. The nomads moved quickly, scavenging weapons and supplies before retreating into the dunes. Chiari stood amidst the wreckage, her chest heaving, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. That evening the camp buzzed with energy. The raid had been a resounding success, and the nomads celebrated around a series of roaring fires. Laughter and conversation filled the air, a rare reprieve from the weight of their struggle. Chiari sat on the outskirts, oft gathering, watching the flames dance. Tane approached, the canteen of water in hand. He offered it to her without a word, took it nodding in thanks. They starting to trust me, she said, her voice quiet. You earned it today, Tane replied, but trust isn't something we give lightly. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. And you? Tane hesitated, then nodded. You've got potential. That potential isn't enough. We'll see if you can keep it up. Chiari smirked faintly, her confidence tempered by exhaustion. I planned to. As the camp settled for the night, Chiari gazed out at the vast expanse of desert. The Baron's forces would retaliate, of that she was certain. But for the first time she felt ready. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was fighting back. And she wasn't alone. The nomads' camp was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Fires smoldered low, casting flickering shadows over the desert sands. Carrie stood at the center of the gathering, her exoskeleton gleaming faintly under the light of the twin moons. Her heart pounded as she faced the circle of riders, their eyes reflecting a mix of hope and fear. Tonight she would lead them into a battle that could change everything. Tane stepped forward, his scarred face unreadable. He held a map etched onto a slab of slate, marking the Baron's stronghold and the surrounding terrain. This is the plan, Hesed, his voice steady. We strike it. Dawn. The Baron forces won't expect an attack on their main supply depot. Chiari studied the map, her mind racing. What's their assistance? Like standard patrols, Tane replied, but they'll call reinforcements. Moment we're spotted, we have to hit hard. And then fast. Jarth, standing to her left, crossed his arms, and if reinforcements come, Tane met his Gazethan. We hold as long as we can, the riders murmured among themselves, unease rippling through the group. Carrie stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. We don't fight a hole, we fight to win. The murmur ceased, every eye turned to her. This isn't just about supplies or survival, she continued. It's about proving that the Baron reached his limits, that we're not just scattered tribes or forgotten. People were a force, and tonight we show him what that means. The silence stretched, then broke as one rider raised their fist, another followed, and soon the camp echoed with shouts of approval. Even Tane nodded, grudging respect flickering in his expression. The march toward their stronghold began under the cover of darkness. The nomads moved in silence there, Sander runners gliding over the dunes like shadows. KY rode at the front, her exoskeleton allowing her to keep pace with the swift vehicles. The crystalline nodes on her suit pulsed faintly, feeding energy to her limbs and amplifying her every step. The Deserts stretched endlessly around them, a vast, unyielding expanse that mirrored the uncertainty in her mind. Jarth rode beside her, his expression grim. "You sure about this?" "No," she admitted, "but it's our best shot." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Just remember you're not alone." Her lips twitched in a faint smile. "I know." They reached the outskirts of the stronghold, just before dawn. The depot loomed ahead, a fortress of steel and stone. Its walls bristling with weaponry. Carrie's eyes swept over the defenses netting. The watchtowers, the automated turrets, the patrols. Pacing the perimeter subtle, she muttered. Tane dismounted Zigming. "For the writers to spread out, we scouted the weak points," he said, pointing to a section of the wall, wherever terrain sloped upward. "That's our entry. We take out the guards' breach. The supply cache and get out before reinforcements arrive." Chiari nodded, her fingers flexing inside the exoskeleton. Dauntless, Letin moved the first guards. Fell swiftly, their muffled cries silenced by the desert's vastness. Kira moved with precision, her exoskeleton enhancing her agility. As she scaled the wall, she landed silently on the other side, her rifle drawn. The courtyard was eerily quiet, the dim glow of floodlights casting long shadows. Jarrett's voice crackled over the comms. "You're clear." Move to the Kashkaya, motioned to the riders behind her, leading them across the courtyard. They moved like a well-oiled machine, their training paying off as they avoided detection. The supply cache stood at the center of the compound, a massive warehouse. Guarded by a squad of soldiers, Chiari signaled for the RedditStory hold position. She crept closer, her exoskeleton quiet hum blending with the ambient noise. When she was within range, activated the suit's energy pulse, sending a shock wave that knocked the guards off their feet. Goshe shouted. The writer surged forward, overwhelming the disoriented. Soldier Stain's blade flashed in the dim light as he dispatched the remaining guards within moments. The warehouse was there. Scolari stepped inside her, breath catching at the sight. Crates of weapons, armor, and supplies, stretched as far as the eye could see. It was more than they had hoped for, enough to arm the entire nomad resistance. "We did it," Jareth said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Chiari allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. Then the alarm sounded, the stronghold erupted into chaos. Sirens wailed as reinforcements spurred into the courtyard, their weapons blazing. Chiari darted outside, her exoskeleton absorbing the impact of a stray shot. The nomads fought fiercely, their sander runners weaving through the chaos as they fired at the advancing Zoldiers. Tane Kerr shouted over the comms, "We need to hold them off, while the others load the supplies on it." Tane replied, his voice steady. Despite the chaos Chiari threw herself into the fray, her movements fluid and precise. The exoskeleton amplified her strength, allowing her to take on multiple enemies at once. She slammed one soldier into the ground, then pivoted to block a strike from another. Her rifle hummed as she fired, the energy bolts cutting through the chaos. Chiari Jarrett's voice rang out, "Look out." She turned just in time to see a towering figure emerge from the smoke, a heavily armored soldier wielding a plasma blade. He moved with terrifying speed, his strikes forcing her to retreat. The exoskeleton systems were in protest as she parried his blows, the crystalline nodes glowing brighter with each impact. "You're strong," the soldier said, his voice distorted by his helmet, "but strength alone won't save you." Kyla gritted her teeth. "We'll see about that." She feinted left, then lunged forward, her gauntlet emitting a burst of energy that sent the soldier staggering before he could recover. She delivered a final blow, her fist connecting with his helmet and sending him crashing to the ground. Kira Tank voice cut through the cowls. "The supplies are loaded. We're pulling out," Goshi replied. "I'll cover you." The nomads retreated, their sanders roaring as they sped toward the dunes. Chiari stayed behind, holding off the remaining soldiers until the last Sandarin zappered over the horizon. Then, with a final surge of energy, she leapt onto her exoskeleton boosters and rocketed after them. The dawn broke over the desert as the nomads regrouped in a secluded valley. The air was thick with exhaustion, but their faces glowed with triumph. For the first time in years, they had dealt a significant epic blow to the Baron's forces. Kai stood apart, her exoskeletons glowed dimming as its Systems powered down, Tane approached his expression softer than she had ever seen it. "You did well," he said simply. Kiari met his gaze, her shoulder straight. "We all did," Tane nodded, then turned to address the gathered riders. "Today we showed Thabarin that we are not weak, we are not broken. We are a force to be reckoned with." The writers erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the valley. Kyla watched them, a quiet pride swelling in her chest. For the first time she felt like she belonged. But she knew this was only the beginning. The Baron would retaliate, and the road ahead would be long and perilous. Still, as she stood among the nomads, she felt a spark of hope, a belief that they could break the chains of oppression and forge a new future, and she would fight to make it happen.